Bells of the Plague. Prague slept under a thick, oppressive fog, the kind that muffled every footstep and swallowed lantern light before it could reach the cobblestones. Yet even in the hushed stillness of midnight, faint, uneven tolls of bells echoed across the city, haunting and persistent. Citizens whispered behind shuttered windows, clutching their shawls and murmuring tales of the old bell tower at St. Vitus, long abandoned and sealed after the last great outbreak of the plague. No living hand had rung its bells for decades, or so they believed, but the sound persisted, hollow and unnatural, vibrating through the streets and shaking the stones as if the city itself were trembling in fear. Marta, a young apothecary's assistant, awoke with a start at the tolling, her heart pounding in rhythm with the deep, resonant clangs. She shivered and peered from her attic window, candle flickering, trying to discern the source through the thickening mist. Shadows danced across the rooftops, distorted and grotesque, their movement betraying no logic of wind or human presence. Memories of her grandmother's tales flooded back, stories of the plague bells, of the masked doctors who walked at night, silent and spectral, their beaked masks glinting faintly under the moonlight. Tales meant to warn children, stories meant to be dismissed. But Marta felt the weight of those legends now pressing against her chest. The tolling grew louder, more insistent, vibrating with an unnatural resonance that seemed to call to her very soul. Trembling, she dressed quickly and descended the narrow stairs, every wooden step groaning under her weight. The streets below were deserted, draped in fog so thick it seemed almost tangible, heavy on her skin and in her lungs. Occasionally, she caught the flicker of a lantern in the distance, but when she tried to approach, the bearer vanished as if swallowed by the mist. The tolling struck again, each strike a thrum that resonated deep within her bones, stirring an instinctive dread that words could never fully capture. As she approached the main square, the bell tower loomed above, a skeletal silhouette against the moonless sky. Its upper windows were dark, yet faint flickers of golden light danced across them intermittently, as though the interior itself were alive. The air grew heavier, carrying the scent of damp stone mixed with a faint metallic tang, like iron or blood. Shadows writhed near the tower's base, forming elongated, twisted shapes reminiscent of the plague doctors from her grandmother's tales. Their faces were hidden, yet Marta felt their gaze pressing against her, deliberate and chilling. Every step closer made the fog thicken around her ankles, each breath come harder, as if the city itself conspired to halt her progress. A sudden, rasping whisper brushed against her ear. "The dead are not silent. The dead do not forgive." She spun, heart hammering, but the fog swallowed any sign of a person. Every shadow along the square seemed to twist independently, curling and stretching unnaturally, watching her movements with predatory patience. The bells tolled again, long and resonant, each strike lingering in the fog like a spectral heartbeat. Marta realized, with a shiver that cut to her core, that the city's forgotten dead were awake tonight. Their presence was not a memory, nor a trick of her mind. Something moved within the mist, patient, deliberate, and hungry, and she had stumbled directly into its path. The wind howled softly through the empty streets, carrying with it fragments of a chorus that seemed to rise from the stones themselves. Whispered words, unintelligible but filled with malice, seemed to coil around her like invisible chains. Marta's candle flickered violently, as if protesting the growing darkness. The bells tolling intensified, shaking her very soul, echoing not just across the city, but inside her mind. She felt the shadows stretch toward her, tendrils of darkness creeping along the cobblestones, waiting, watching, testing her courage. Tonight, the line between life and death had blurred, and the city's spectral inhabitants were stepping closer to claim her presence. Marta's footsteps echoed unnaturally across the empty square, swallowed almost immediately by the dense fog that clung to the cobblestones. Each toll of the bell seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat, vibrating through her chest, reverberating in her temples. The shadows of the plague doctors at the tower's base had not moved, yet their presence was oppressive, alive in a way that made her stomach twist. She felt eyes upon her from every direction, though no living soul was near. A low rustle came from a narrow alley to her left. She froze, breath catching in her throat. A figure emerged slowly from the mist, cloaked in black robes and a mask with the familiar beak, but there was something wrong. The figure's gait was unsteady, too fluid, limbs moving in ways that no human should. The metal of its mask glinted as if reflecting some unseen light, yet the eyes behind it glowed faintly red. Marta's pulse surged, but curiosity, or perhaps the inexplicable pull of the city's haunted heart, urged her closer. She stepped cautiously, keeping her candle raised. The figure stopped, tilting its head unnaturally, and whispered, though the sound seemed carried on the wind rather than from its mouth. "Do you hear them? They toll for you." Marta's hand shook as the words sank into her mind. She glanced toward the tower. The bells rang faster now, in irregular patterns that mimicked her racing heartbeat. Every strike seemed to vibrate not just in the air, but in the fog itself, sending ripples through the mist as though it were a living thing. From behind, a second figure emerged, identical to the first. A faint, eerie chorus of whispers began rising, coming from all directions, speaking her name in fragmented syllables, taunting, coaxing. Shadows swirled unnaturally, elongating along the walls of nearby buildings, intertwining like smoke and reaching for her. Marta tried to step back, but the fog thickened at her ankles, almost viscous, anchoring her to the spot. Fear clawed at her mind, yet a morbid fascination rooted her in place. The air grew colder with each toll of the bell, carrying with it the metallic scent of iron and decay. Marta realized the figures were not alone. Faint silhouettes appeared in the mist, dozens of them, each draped in dark robes, faces obscured, moving silently but deliberately. They formed a half-circle around her, their collective presence pressing in. Every whisper merged into a single, chilling chant. "Join us, join us, the city remembers." Desperate, she lifted her candle higher, scanning for an escape. The buildings around the square appeared to shift subtly, streets lengthening, corners bending impossibly, as though the city itself were reshaping to trap her. She stumbled forward, each step met by resistance, fog curling around her like living tendrils. The tolling of the bell now roared in her ears, a deafening insistence, calling her toward the tower with a magnetic pull she could not resist. A sudden gust extinguished her candle. Darkness swallowed her, thick and absolute. Yet even in the black, the glowing eyes of the plague figures appeared before her, their whispers now unmistakably close, brushing against her mind. "You are ours tonight, you walk with the dead." Marta's heart nearly stopped. The fog churned, shadows converged, and the bell's toll struck once more, the vibration echoing through her very bones. She understood, in a moment of terror and clarity, that she had stepped into a world where the dead walked, and the city itself conspired to draw her deeper into its haunted labyrinth. Marta's pulse pounded as she stumbled through the fog, the oppressive presence of the cloaked figures closing in from all directions. Each toll of the bell reverberated like a drumbeat in her skull, and every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, creeping along walls and rooftops with a sinister awareness. She could hear whispers weaving through the mist, fragments of old prayers, curses, and warnings, all repeating her name in fragmented tones that set her teeth on edge. The metallic scent of decay grew stronger, mingling with the damp fog, turning the night air thick and suffocating. She tried to retrace her steps, but the streets no longer resembled the map she knew. Alleyways twisted impossibly, corners bent where no building should allow, and the familiar square had become a labyrinth. The bell tower loomed overhead, its flickering lights casting grotesque shadows that writhed across the fog, sometimes detaching from the walls as if alive. A sudden movement caught her eye. One of the figures lifted a hand, skeletal and impossibly elongated beneath the dark robes, pointing directly at her. Marta froze, breath catching in her throat, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. A low, rasping chant rose from the surrounding fog. Marta could make out words now, chilling in their clarity. The city remembers, the city collects, the plague tolls for all. The figures advanced silently, their glowing eyes fixed on her. Yet each step seemed to push her backward through the fog, as though invisible hands were manipulating the very air. She tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The whispering became a cacophony inside her head, overlapping voices that tugged at memories of the dead, of long-forgotten faces in the city cemetery, of plague victims whose cries had echoed through the centuries. Marta's candle flickered back to life for a brief moment, revealing a closer view of the figures. Their masks were cracked and warped, eyes glowing faintly red, shadows writhing across their robes like living tendrils. She noticed that some wore masks she recognized from old woodcuts in the apothecary's library, images of plague doctors from centuries past, but distorted in ways that defied reality. The tolling of the bell grew louder, faster, shaking the stones beneath her feet. She felt the vibrations travel up her legs, through her torso, rattling her teeth. Each strike seemed to pull her closer to the tower, as if the bells themselves were chains wrapped around her soul. Suddenly, one figure reached forward, its hand passing through the fog like liquid, grazing her shoulder. A shock ran through Marta's body, cold and electric, and the whispers transformed into a singular, menacing voice. "You cannot leave. The dead do not forgive." She recoiled, spinning to run, but the streets had changed again. Familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by endless alleys that twisted into darkness. Her candlelight trembled in her shaking hand, revealing glimpses of other figures materializing in the fog, some with grotesque deformities, some appearing almost human, all reaching silently toward her with outstretched hands. Marta realized, with a shuddering clarity, that the city itself had become a trap, a vessel for the restless dead. Every alley, every street, every square pulsed with a malevolent will, guiding her toward the tower. The bell tolled once more, longer, echoing across rooftops, through the fog, and deep into her chest. She stumbled, fell to her knees, and felt the cold touch of the fog wrap around her ankles like icy serpents. Her mind spun in terror as the shadows closed in, whispering secrets of the plague, of souls collected, of the inevitable fate awaiting anyone who heard the tolling. Marta's eyes locked on the bell tower's entrance, faint golden light spilling from the arched doorway. Every instinct screamed to flee, but some deeper, darker curiosity compelled her forward. As she rose, the figures surged closer, shadows merging with the fog, voices rising in a chorus. Come, join us, hear the bells. The city held its breath, and Marta felt herself poised on the edge between the living and the dead, drawn inexorably toward the tower where the source of the tolling awaited. Marta's trembling hands gripped the stone archway of the bell tower as she stepped inside. Darkness swallowed her instantly, the candlelight flickering feebly against the blackened walls. The air was thick, musty, and clung to her skin, carrying the faint metallic tang of old blood and decay. The bells overhead no longer tolled from afar. Their resonance vibrated within the tower itself, shaking the floor beneath her feet. Shadows flickered along the walls, elongating unnaturally, writhing like serpents coiling for a strike. A sudden draft swept through the chamber, extinguishing her candle. In the suffocating darkness, the figures emerged silently from the corners, their presence oppressive, their glowing eyes fixed on her. She heard whispers weaving through the shadows, fragments of names, dates, and pleas from the long dead, all merging into a dreadful chorus that spoke directly to her mind. Her knees buckled under the weight of fear and fatigue, yet something, curiosity, terror, or an unseen compulsion, propelled her deeper into the tower. The spiral staircase leading to the upper belfry twisted impossibly in the fog of her mind. Each step groaned, sounding like the wails of the departed echoing through centuries. Marta's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. As she ascended, the whispers intensified, forming coherent phrases. You hear them, do you not? The bells toll for your soul. The city remembers. She stumbled, clutching the railing as unseen hands seemed to tug at her, guiding her inexorably upward. At the top, the bell chamber was alive with movement. The massive bell hung suspended, swaying slowly though no wind blew. Shadows swirled around it, coalescing into grotesque, human-like forms whose faces flickered with expressions of agony. Marta's candle flared briefly, illuminating a sea of skeletal hands reaching from the floorboards, clawing, grasping, desperate to touch the living. The whispers erupted into a cacophony, echoing off the stone, filling her head with voices of plague victims long buried beneath the city. Each name, each plea, each demand pierced her consciousness like shards of ice. One figure, taller than the rest, detached itself from the mass of shadows and moved toward her. Its beaked mask was cracked, and behind the darkness of the eye holes, glowing coals of red burned with malevolent awareness. It extended a hand toward Marta. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet her legs refused to obey. Her mind spun in terror, realizing that the bell tower itself was alive, feeding on fear, shaping reality, and drawing her closer to the unknown force commanding the dead. The massive bell began to swing, moving of its own volition. With each strike, the shadows shrieked, curling and twisting, forming grotesque visages above her. Marta felt the vibration travel through her body, bone and soul rattling in rhythm with the unearthly toll. She fell to her knees, hands clasped over her ears, but the sound penetrated deeper, embedding itself into her thoughts, filling her with visions of centuries of plague, death, and suffering. A final, deafening toll echoed through the chamber, and the figure reached her, touching her shoulder lightly, but the cold, ethereal pressure froze her blood. Whispers coalesced into a single command, clear and dreadful. You belong to the city. The bells have claimed you. Marta's eyes darted to the bell itself, and for an instant, she swore she saw faint, ghostly faces pressed against its surface, mouths open in silent screams. The air thickened, vibrating with life, or something close to it, and she understood the truth. The dead were not silent, and the tolling had not been merely a warning. It had been a summons. Frozen and overwhelmed, Marta realized she was on the threshold of a fate beyond comprehension. The city's dead waited, patient, omnipresent, as the tolling of the plague bells grew ever louder, and she could do nothing but stand, trembling, as shadows closed in around her. Marta's knees pressed into the cold stone floor as the shadows engulfed her, each tendril of darkness curling around her limbs, binding her in an unseen grip. The bell overhead continued to toll, each strike echoing through the chamber and vibrating inside her chest. Faces appeared in the fog, faces of the long dead, pressed against the walls and bell, their mouths frozen in silent screams. The whispers merged into a singular, commanding voice. The city remembers, and you are now part of it. Her candle flickered back to life for a brief instant, revealing the figures surrounding her in full form. Skeletal hands, beaked masks cracked and warped, robes crawling with writhing shadows that seemed to pulse with life. She realized with mounting horror that the plague bells were not mere instruments, but conduits, anchors binding the dead to the living, connecting centuries of suffering into a single, malevolent consciousness. The air was thick with the scent of decay and iron, and with every toll, the shadows grew more solid, more real, encroaching upon her senses until the boundary between life and death blurred. A sudden gust of wind, cold as the grave, swirled through the chamber, lifting the shadows and merging them into a single towering form. The figure stepped forward, and the bell's resonance surged with unnatural force, shaking the tower walls, rattling the stones under her. Marta's body was frozen, yet her mind raced. She understood that fleeing was impossible. The city itself had claimed her presence, twisting the streets, alleys, and towers into a labyrinth designed to deliver the living directly to the dead. She felt the weight of centuries pressing upon her, the collective grief, fear, and anger of countless plague victims coursing through her veins. Then, the tower seemed to exhale. Shadows retreated momentarily, coiling toward the walls, but the bell's tolling continued, steady, unyielding. Marta's vision blurred as she tried to comprehend her fate. A cold, skeletal hand brushed against her cheek, and she felt an icy whisper. You will walk among us, hear the tolling, become the city remembers. The fog outside swirled violently, and she glimpsed faint silhouettes in the square below, shrouded in mist, their heads bowed, waiting. The city was patient. The dead were patient. Marta's mind teetered on the edge of consciousness and madness. The candlelight flickered again, revealing the grotesque forms reaching toward her, their whispers now indistinguishable from the wind itself. In that moment, she realized that she had become part of the tolling, part of the city's eternal lament. The bell struck once more, a sound that would echo in the streets, in the fog, and in the hearts of those who dared walk near the old bell tower for centuries to come. As dawn struggled to pierce the lingering fog, the bell tower stood silent to the naked eye. Yet somewhere deep within, Marta's presence hummed alongside the shadows, part of the endless ritual. The city exhaled an eerie stillness, waiting patiently for the next unwary soul to hear the tolling, to follow, and to join the forgotten chorus.